We are scheduled to start at 2, but we're just going to give it a couple more minutes just to allow anybody who might be running a little bit late to give them a chance to log in.
You break up there?
Just waiting until 2:02 to start, just in case anyone's running late. We've been at 18 people for almost a full minute now, so I'll feel comfortable starting at 2:02. All right, we just had a couple additional folks log on, so we are going to get started. If you have not already, please introduce yourself in the chat, what you do and what you hope to get out of today. This just helps me to understand who my audience is and helps me to try and ensure that I cover the things that you are looking to hear about today. The training that you are logging into is Question, Persuade, Refer. It's a gatekeeper suicide prevention training. And what that means is really that any of us could serve as a gatekeeper or someone who serves as the doorway to the services that someone who is having thoughts of suicide might need to access in order to save their life. We will talk through today, some common misunderstandings about suicide. We'll talk about some warning signs. We'll talk about how to have that conversation a little bit, and then what to do once you have identified that someone is having thoughts of suicide. And I will close our time together by just reviewing some local resources and answering any questions that you all might have. As we go through the training, I see that all of you, most of you, except for thank you, William. Thank you, Leslie, and thank you, Jessica, for having your cameras on. Otherwise, it's just kind of weird for me to just talk to myself. But if you have a question, thanks, Destiny. If you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask the question. You can put it in the chat, but once I start sharing my screen, I'm really terrible at noticing the chat because I have to intentionally go to it to see if anybody's put anything in there. So if you have a question or something really pressing, please just feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt. I'll also stop and awkwardly pause as we do in these Zoom meetings and ask if anyone has questions, to which I usually receive a lot of silence. So that's okay. Also, if you are new to Zoom, on the bottom of your screen, if you hover, there's a control panel and there are some reactions buttons. So there is one section of the training where I'll be asking for a thumbs up or thumbs down. You are absolutely free to use your digital thumbs up or thumbs down through that reactions tab, or you can turn your camera on and give me a real thumbs up or a real thumbs down. Totally up to you. So I'm going to share my screen now. Let's see, slideshow from beginning. All right. Leslie, can you give me a thumbs up if you see that screen that says Question, Persuade, Refer? Thank you. Okay, so I mentioned already what training you are here for. So if that's the wrong training, then sorry, you're not in the right place. Otherwise, we are going to spend the next hour or so talking about suicide prevention. I like to start out with just talking about the fact that we're not really talking about this enough. Partially because, you hear all the time people say, stop the stigma, or reduce the stigma, or it's okay to not be okay. But I don't really think that people really tangibly work to reduce the stigma or how they know to make it okay to not be okay. And so that's why it's important to be able to have the conversation and work through some of that. One of the recommendations that we have here at Pike Speak Suicide Prevention is that you talk about mental health the way you talk about any health issue. And I know that for some folks that is kind of controversial because they don't want to be considered sick because they have a mental illness. Sorry, I dropped my mouse. But I don't think there should be judgment with any kind of sickness. And I think there's absolutely less judgment when someone says, I have the flu. You know, if you call off for work and say, I have the flu versus I'm depressed today, there's a different type of judgment that occurs when you say that when they are essentially equivalent things. So I want to talk through that a little bit. If we were in a classroom, I would say, raise your hand if you've ever had the common cold, or if you've had food poisoning, if you've had a headache, and almost everyone will raise their hand. If you don't raise your hand, it's because you have an amazing immune system and you're the luckiest person ever. But almost everybody has experienced that. If not that, then they've definitely like tripped and twisted their ankle, or they've gotten a paper cut. Some sort of health issue has arisen across their lifetime. I am sure of it. And then I would ask, who's ever had something that they need to see a doctor for, like strep throat or an allergy that they can't make go away. And again, people would raise their hands and they would feel comfortable doing that. But then I would say, who in this room has experienced mental illness? And without a doubt, there would be less hands raised in the room. And that's for two reasons. One, because there is a stigma regarding talking about mental health out loud, and we don't feel super comfortable being transparent about that. And two, because we're confused about what I mean when I say mental illness. And so I want you to think about how we handle something like strep throat. When you get strep throat, you do all the things. You drink grandma's tea. You take all those over-the-counter things. You hope and pray that it's just allergies. And then a few days later, after you have exhausted everything that you know how to address those symptoms, you admit, man, maybe it makes sense to go to the doctor. And you do that because you know that you might have symptoms that you alone cannot manage, and that if you don't go to the doctor, it could get worse. And so imagine if we lived in a world where we felt the same about our mental health symptoms. If we had been experiencing sadness or depression, anxiety, or something like that for more than a couple of days leading into a couple of weeks, and it just made sense that we might be experiencing symptoms that we can't manage on our own, and it makes sense to go see somebody to help us with that, what a different world we would live in. But that's not how we talk about it. And I don't understand why, because I have tennis elbow and it's super annoying because I don't even play tennis, but it really impacts me when I play volleyball. And so the way that I handle this injury is I complain about it incessantly to everyone, especially when it is bothering me. And this talking about it out loud has resulted in a few things. It's resulted in people telling me about their injuries that they have experienced. It's resulted in people giving me tips about how I can manage my symptoms and my pain, the things that have worked for them. It's resulted in people giving me referrals to massage therapists, to people who do different types of treatment, like acupuncture and all of those different things. And so it's really opened up, different resources that I could access or different ideas that I could try to manage my symptoms. And again, wouldn't it be great if we could do that with mental health? And so when you think about mental illness, I want you to think about a time when you have experienced negative emotions, and it lasts for maybe a couple of hours. For me, the example I like to use, because I am a mother of 4 teenagers, is like that trying to leave the house on time situation, where you definitely told them a couple days before, and then last night before bed, exactly what time you need to leave the house. And still, you can tell you're not going to leave at the time that you hope to, because they're just not moving at the speed that you had hoped. And you start to have all these negative feelings because maybe it's the third time this week this has happened. And maybe it's an important appointment and you don't want to be judged for not being able to get your teenagers into the car on time. And you're just experiencing all these negative emotions. You feel irritated about it. It impacts you for a couple of hours. And then you take a break, you take a breath, you're able to calm down and you feel better. I think of that as the same thing as the headache that you get when you are around someone who has like a perfume that you can't tolerate. It's symptoms that happen because of a situational issue that impacts you in a negative way. And in most cases, you have the ability to manage those symptoms on your own and return back to your normal routine. And so if you think about it in that way, every single person in this virtual classroom has definitely experienced mental illness. Again, unless you just are the luckiest person who ever existed, then maybe, but I don't believe it. I think everybody has had that. The health comparison that we're going to use today is appendicitis. So many, many years ago, someone said, man, people do not need to die by appendicitis. Death by appendicitis is preventable. If we could just get medical care, if we just could let people know the symptoms and we could get people to medical care in time, no one would have to die by appendicitis. So now if you go into a room and you say, what do you do if you think someone has appendicitis? Everybody knows. You take them to the emergency room. Why? Because it might be a life or death situation that I cannot manage and they need help. They might need help, but I don't know if they do or not. So it's just best for me to take them just in case. And that's how we really want people to be thinking about suicide. We want you to be able to understand what the signs and symptoms are that someone might be at risk for suicide, and understand that if you can't ascertain the risk, you really need to take them to somebody who can, because you could be in a life or death situation. And so try it out. Try talking about mental health out loud in the open in the same casual way that you talk about having a cold, how I talk about my tennis elbow. Now when I go in, I'm able to say, these kids are trying me. My emotions are very negative right now. Or I might say, I'm feeling really sad today because I had whatever situation. But just getting really comfortable with saying emotional words out loud in a way that makes it feel like other people can use those words and have those conversations. And I think that it will really help. Maybe you could go on your social media and say, like, saw my therapist today, the same way people are like, saw my physical therapist today and did that work in the gym, because we really need to attend to our mental health the same way that we attend to our physical health. It's part of our body. I don't understand where we happen to fall into this place where we decided to put the brain in a category outside of our body. But the reality of it is, it's part of our body, it's part of our health, and that's how we should be talking about it and thinking about it. Let's define the issue for El Paso County. If you live here, then you probably already know. But in El Paso County, we have a problem with suicide. We lead the state in deaths by suicide, and we live in a state that lands in the top 10 for deaths by suicide almost every year. So if you look here on this big breakdown, this is from the 2020 coroner report, which is a public document. It's the third leading cause of death in El Paso County. So when you talk to people about like why they should engage in safe storage with their firearms, they say something like, the violence in our county, like, it's up so high, I'm not going to get murdered. I need access to my weapon for personal protection. I want you to look at the number of deaths by suicide as compared to homicide. And that really helps us to understand what we should be paying attention to. I also think it's important to point out that the most access lethal means is a firearm. So if you look over there, firearms account for 97 of the 178 deaths by suicide that occurred in 2020. 97. That's a pretty big percentage of those deaths. And so again, if we talk about safe storage, yes, I understand I am on a soapbox right now, but I think it's a soapbox that there's room for all of you to be on with me, because this is El Paso County. We're a firearm-friendly community. And when people ask me, Cass, why is El Paso County so high in deaths by suicide? Is it the altitude? Is it the military presence? Is it this or that? what we have in common with other communities who have high numbers of suicide is that we are a firearm-friendly community. That's the number one common factor. And so that comes down to, with ownership comes responsibility. And I think we can all agree, even the most trained individual with firearms, on a day where they are experiencing a situational mental illness and they have drank a handle of whiskey, that they should not access a firearm, and that there should be things put in place that create a pause before they get to that firearm to give us a chance to have a window of prevention. That's all I'm saying. I will step off the soapbox now. Other important facts in the charts that were reviewed for the deaths by suicide in 2020, average age was 42. So it's still our working age white male that is most often dying by suicide. 19% of those individuals made social media posts indicating suicidal intentions. 61% reported having a history of prior suicidal thoughts. 73% had some sort of substance on board at the time of death. And I know that, you know, the whole thing about THC and the correlation with suicide is a hot topic right now, but honestly, it's alcohol. Alcohol is the most commonly accessed substance on the day that someone decides to die by suicide. And then 20% have known or active prior military duty. And here's what you need to understand about this 178 total. It doesn't include any deaths by suicide that occur on post. Those numbers are not included in the El Paso County coroner numbers, and that's because they are processed through their own system. So this number would be higher, I am certain, if those numbers were included. And then just again, remembering our highest demographic dying by suicide is still that working age white male. 79% of completed suicides were male in 2020. That's a pretty consistent stat. And then always the question of how did COVID impact suicide? And so 18 of the cases in 2020, they were able to identify some sort of tangible link between the death by suicide and COVID. So now we understand, I'm sure you already did, why it's so important that people get trained in suicide prevention. The more people who are looking through a lens of prevention, the more people who can identify someone might be at risk and can help people get help. And I want to acknowledge a few things. So one, if you are a suicide loss survivor, which it's very likely that some of you who are attending this virtual training are, it's really hurtful to constantly hear how preventable suicide is. I am a suicide loss survivor myself. I lost a really good friend to suicide. And so I understand the pain of those words. I also want you to know that that's not the intention behind those words. Really, what I know is that when I think through the last few months with my friend, I was looking at him with very human eyes. I wasn't looking at him through a lens of prevention. I didn't know then what I know now. If I had been looking through a lens of prevention, I would have acted differently. But you only know what you know. And that's what I want to acknowledge for any of our suicide loss survivors that might be in this class today. What I promise is that I have learned, you know, and that his death will not be in vain, that I will take what I have learned, a painful, painful lesson, and I will use it to try and save as many others as I can. The other thing that I want to acknowledge is that language matters. And we know that across many different facets of our community, but especially in mental health. And so you'll hear me use the most common terminology that's related to suicide during this training. You know, we no longer say committed or completed, successful or unsuccessful. We just call it what it is, which is died by suicide, deaths by suicide, taking one's own life, taking his life, took her life, instead of putting other words that could just be interpreted in different ways. And I know that you might think like, Cass, that's a bunch of semantics. Who really cares? And here's the last thing that I'm going to acknowledge right now. Suicide grief is like no other grief. It's very different. And that's because there are a lot of unanswered questions that might very well never be answered. Very different from losing a loved one to a car accident or to cancer or to at the hands of another. You have something very understandable that brought on that death. And so suicide grief has that extra component to it of all of the unknowns, which creates a different kind of pain. And if I can avoid pricking you in your grief today by using careful language, I think it's worth it. And I just encourage us all to be thoughtful in that same way. Today, we are going to be talking about how to offer hope through positive action. And so you are not going to learn how to counsel someone who is having thoughts of suicide, or how to treat someone who's having thoughts of suicide. We will start off by just talking about some misconceptions about suicide. So this is where you're going to use your thumbs up or thumbs down. We're going to play 2 truths and a lie. I'm going to read 3 statements. 3 of these statements are true, and 1 of these statements is a myth. And so I'm going to read them all, and then I'm going to go through and ask you to give me a thumbs up if you think something's a truth, and a thumbs down if you think it is a myth. But first, I will read them. Truth or lie, asking someone directly about suicidal intent lowers anxiety, opens communication, and lowers the risk of an impulsive act. Truth or lie, suicidal people keep their plans to themselves. And truth or lie, suicide is the most preventable kind of death, and almost any positive action may save a life. Let's start at the top. So give me a thumbs up if you believe this to be true, and a thumbs up if you believe it to be a myth. Asking someone directly about suicidal intent lowers anxiety, opens communication, and lowers the risk of an impulsive act. I'm seeing some thumbs up. Seeing some digital thumbs up. Okay. Very nice. All right, let's check on the next one. Truth or lie, suicidal people keep their plans to themselves. So if you believe that to be a truth, give me a thumbs up. If you believe it to be a myth, thumbs down. So we have a mixture of both thumbs up and thumbs down for this one. And then the last statement, truth or lie, suicide is the most preventable kind of death, and almost any positive action may save a life. Thumbs up if you believe that to be a truth, thumbs down if you believe it to be a myth. Seeing a lot of thumbs up for this one. All right, let's take a look. So if you don't see, if you hover at the bottom of your screen, there's a reactions icon. It's like a smiley face with a plus sign, and that will give you the option to do a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Okay, so the top one is a truth. Asking someone directly about suicidal intent lowers anxiety, opens communication, and lowers the risk of an impulsive act. It's often feared that talking about suicide increases the risk, as if you could plant the thought of suicide in someone's head, but that's just not true. Usually someone who is having thoughts of suicide has been thinking about it for some time. And a lot of time it's like this secret that they're carrying within themselves. And so being able to talk about it out loud can actually provide a lot of relief for them, and it can provide a window of prevention so that we can help have that conversation and provide them with some different options. The second one, many of you are correct, is a myth. Suicidal people keep their plans to themselves. Research shows that about 80% of individuals who engage in some sort of suicidal behavior do indicate that they are going to be doing that within at least a week preceding their attempt. And when we say communicate, that doesn't mean like, Cass, I'm having thoughts of suicide and here's what I'm planning on doing. It could be a number of the different warning signs that we're going to be talking about as we go through this training. And that last one, there is a misconception that once a person decides to die by suicide, there's nothing anyone can do to stop them. And so that's why many people don't believe that suicide is preventable. But if you would like to know more about this topic, you can read a book that's been written by Thomas Joyner called Why People Die by Suicide. And in that book, he talks about the interpersonal theory of suicide, and he addresses this idea of our ability for self-lethality. And that, it's not really within our nature to hurt ourselves in such a fatal way. And so a lot of times someone who's having thoughts of suicide has increased their tolerance of this idea with a specific means. And so if you're able to reduce access to that means, it provides us a window of prevention, because the thing that they felt comfortable engaging with is no longer available to them. And so while they might choose another means, it does create a pause and helps create a window of prevention to allow us to try and introduce some other options for them. We also know that, the quicker that we can get intervention in place, and for most, once it's been acknowledged that they're having thoughts of suicide and intervention occurs, out of that 80% who communicate, only 5% will go on to actually die by suicide. So that's where that statement of it's one of the most preventable kinds of death because of that number. So now, how do we know that we need to engage in QPR? Well, we need to be able to identify that someone might be having thoughts of suicide. And so we're going to talk about some of the clues and warning signs that someone might be giving off. And so we think of this as communicating that I am at risk for suicide. And so someone might talk about it. And while this is probably happens the least often, but it does happen sometimes. And so a lot of times when someone says something like, I wish I were dead, or I just want to die, that is met with things like, don't talk like that, or it's not that serious, quit talking crazy. And we immediately remove the option of having an honest conversation about suicide from the table when we respond in that way. The other challenge that we have with this, we did this training for some high school teachers, and they said, Cass, do you know how many times our students joke about suicide? And so, yeah, I get it. Probably even some of you were like, kill me. One more mandatory training I have to sit through. And so I get it that this is like common language and common material for joking. But what I also know is that there are different terms and topics that we as a community have taken a stance on and said, this isn't an acceptable term anymore. This isn't an acceptable topic to kid about. And I think that suicide should fall into that. It's not a category to be joked about. And here's why. You never know who in the room is having thoughts of suicide. And so suddenly it's a joking matter for everyone around them. And there's nothing, that could really minimize someone's existence sometimes. Or you never know who is grieving a loss of someone by suicide. And so you're just taking their grief and stomping all over it and saying, it's a laughing matter, it doesn't matter to me. And so it's really important for us to understand that and act accordingly and to confront it when it happens. And teachers say to me, Cass, every single time, because literally like every time I say, pull out your book, kids are like, making comments. And I'm like, yes. And here's why. Because that's the only way it's going to fall into the category of something that's no longer okay to joke about, is if it's confronted when it happens. And two, it sends a message to anyone in that room who does need to have a conversation about suicide, that I am someone who is comfortable talking about suicide and who takes, who is safe to talk about suicide. Because this is how I'm going to address that joke. I'm going to say, I think you're kidding. I'm not 100% sure. So I want you to know that I'm available to talk if you are having thoughts of suicide. And most of the time they're going to say, oh my gosh, Cass, I cannot joke about anything with you. You're such a wet blanket. You can't even take a joke. And I'm just going to say, yeah, I don't think suicide is a joking matter. So that's just where I stand on it. But I do care about you. Here to talk if you need it. And that's kind of how I handle that. And that is what I think is one of the most appropriate ways, because I'm not villainizing anybody. I'm keeping it light, but I'm also sending that message that I don't think it's funny. It's not a joking matter. And I'm someone safe that you could talk to about that with. And then people might make indirect statements. And so answering the phone at Pikes Peak Suicide Prevention, one of the most common ones that I hear is how tired they are. They say things like, I just want to go to sleep and never wake up. It doesn't matter. They would be better off without me. Pretty soon you won't have to worry about me. Or they say things like, I just don't think I can take this anymore. I don't want to be here anymore. And so, I just ask, when you say that you want to go to sleep and never wake up again, are you talking about dying by suicide? What do you mean when you're talking about that? Are you saying that, are you talking about killing yourself? And I just ask if that's what they mean. And if that's not what they mean, they're going to tell me, they're going to say, no, that's not what I mean. I'm just really tired. I can't handle this anymore. I'm not there, but I'm definitely in a dark place. Or they might say yes. And I cannot tell you how many times I have asked the question because I know I'm supposed to, and I am surprised because the answer is yes, when I thought for sure the answer was going to be no. And so that's why it's important to ask, because someone might not be brave enough to say it all the way. They might not be fully 100% conscious that that's what they're talking about. But then when it comes up, it really clarifies and helps you have a window of prevention so you can offer those other options. Behavioral clues, just remembering that behavior is a language all on its own, and it's the language that we most often revert to when we don't have the words. So one, just keep in mind, keep it in your little memory box if you know that someone has had previous suicide attempts. Remember that number of people who died by suicide who we knew had a history of kind of thinking about it. So that's why it's important. That's why we want to know that. If you know that they're acquiring a gun or stockpiling pills, or if you know that they are like a huge gun person. We had a student take his life by suicide because his family, they used firearms recreationally. He was identified by his school as, experiencing some situational mental illness. They went as a family over holiday break to a shooting range, and he took his life at the shooting range. And so that's why if you know this person is showing any symptoms and they have access to a gun, it is important to reduce access to that lethal means. It's important to have this conversation. If you know that they are someone who has access to pills because someone in their family is ill or because you know that they take medication, it's really important that we address access to lethal means. If you know that they are someone who is living with a chronic mental illness, or is someone who is, living with mental health challenges. Maybe it's not diagnosed or formal, but this is a person who's kind of like, they're kind of moody, or you notice that, their baseline is kind of like depressed. There's someone who, especially if something's happening in their life, you want to pay attention to. If it seems like they're putting their personal affairs in order, and I do not always mean like a last will and testament, which is what people often think that I am referring to when I say that, which could be true, but most often it's sending you a private message saying something like, hey, Destiny, I just wanted you to know that I've always appreciated how kind you've been to me. I just wanted you to notice that I noticed that, and I wanted to make sure that I said thank you to you because I don't think I ever had. And so if that is not how this person communicates with you on a regular basis, if someone says goodbye to you and they like give you a deep hug and they say, hey, I love you. I want you to know that. Don't ever forget that. Ask a question, and you don't have to be weird about it. You can just say like, hey, I love all the love that you're giving me right now, but I'm just wondering what's different about today. Why do you feel like being so loving with me today? And just, finding out what has changed. If they're giving away their prized possessions, a big one here are giving away their pets. We all have that friend who has a pet that they treat like their child. And so for some of these folks, when they're having thoughts of suicide, they really need to know that their pet is going to be taken care of. And so they take steps to rehome their pet. So paying attention to that, or other, prized possessions, which is a common one that we talk about all the time. But, if you just happen to be in that situation where someone's like, hey, I was cleaning out my closet, I found this thing, I'd like you to have it. Again, it's just a question of like, what made you give that to me today? And just finding out like what's put them in this sentimental mood. A sudden interest or disinterest in religion. Someone who is thinking about taking their own life probably has a complicated relationship with their faith at this time. Drug and alcohol abuse, either, suddenly there's an increase, and it could be something real simple. Like you just happen to think about like the last couple of times that I have gone to happy hour with this person, they are getting it. Like I did not even know that they drank that way. Goodness gracious, and just noticing this change. Or all of a sudden, like someone is just like waking and baking every single day. And you're like, I did not know that you smoked weed like that. So those changes, or someone who's been maintaining their sobriety and all of a sudden they've fallen off the wagon, we know that it's usually a situational crisis that makes them take those steps. And then finally, this says unexplained anger, aggression, and irritability. So I would just say, like, anybody who's having like out of the ordinary outbursts or just a change in their affect, the way that they're behaving, if there's a major change, and it's just like, hey, I noticed this difference in you, and I'm just wondering about it, and I want to make sure that you're okay. The last thing that I want to say about behavior, and this is part of what I learned in the loss of my friend, is that, we live in a culture of consequence. Most often, when someone engages in negative behaviors, our first response is to consequence, to say something like, that's not okay, or you need to stop doing that, or this is not good. What I would encourage you to do is, instead of first responding with consequence, is get curious. Ask what's going on. Why? Why am I seeing this happening? What's making you feel like you want to be drunk all the time? What's making you post these things on social media? When I think of my friend, the way I responded was I unfollowed him on social media because I thought, like, he is out of hand. And I remember having the conversation with him of like, I'm not going out with you anymore. The past couple of times that we've gone out, like, you are getting out of hand and it's no fun. Instead of saying like, the past couple of times that we've gone out, you have gotten out of hand and I'm worried about you. What is going on? Those are two very different conversations. And one of them, triggers guilt and shame, and one of them provides an opportunity for you to tell me your story. And so I just think there's a lot of power in hearing someone's story, and it gives you an opportunity to have a window of prevention. And so curiosity before consequence. Situational clues. These are actually some of my favorites because, we will have those people who show no signs. We will have those people who just believe that they need to keep it together under all circumstances, that have trained themselves not to show their emotions. And so, I sit on a lot of community panels and like town hall talks where we're talking about suicide prevention. And, I remember sitting on this panel and these parents were like grilling us. And it was myself, someone from El Paso County Health, and Dr. Leon Kelly, our coroner. And they were parents and they were saying, like, what are the exact things? What do we need to know to keep our kids from dying by suicide? And I love Dr. Kelly's answer because he said, you just got to really pay attention. Pay attention to what's happening in people's lives. If they are experiencing something that would trigger negative emotions for you, then you should check in with them. Because oftentimes what we're seeing, especially with our young people who are dying by suicide, it's not necessarily something that we would identify as super serious, but it's something that is a negative situation that is creating some super serious emotions for them. And so if you know that something is happening for them, just checking in with them could make all the difference. Here's a list of some of the most common ones that we see in individuals who have died by suicide: being fired or expelled from school, a recent or unwanted move, being cut from a team, a huge one for our high-performing teens, loss of any major relationship. And while this could be a platonic or romantic relationships, we most often see it be tied to a romantic relationship. Death of a loved one, especially by suicide. Exposure to suicide increases risk of suicide. Diagnosis of a serious illness. Sudden unexpected loss of freedom or fear of punishment. So a lot of times with our justice involved individuals. A publicly shaming experience. And I just want to pause here because we now live in a time where the ability to shame one another is just the power we have, right? We can, if you just think of like that Bernie Sanders image where he was sitting in that chair with his mittens crossed, how quickly that picture was everywhere, right? He sat like that, and the next day it was everywhere across every platform. Everybody was kidding around about it. That's how quickly Our little situations can be shared with the world. And luckily, I think, Bernie Sanders was okay with that because it wasn't really an embarrassing picture. But there are things that we do that we don't think about. Now at work, we have like those office chat things like Office Skype or different things like that where you can quickly message either individuals or the whole group. And maybe someone's walking past you, you see like, oh, their skirt is tucked into their underwear. Let me just take a picture of that and share it with the office. Ha ha ha. Or so and so tripped and fell as they were walking past my desk. And it's just like, because you can make these funny memes or different gifs just like that. It's so easy to do. But we just never know what's happening in someone else's life. Like if I tuck my skirt into my underwear on the same day that I'm upset because my kids didn't let me get out of the house at the same time, and I'm also worried because I'm having a hard time paying my bills, that could be the thing that pushes me over the edge. And so just be kind to one another. Also, it's just this new thing that both teenagers and adults, even if they don't want to admit it, are doing where we're sharing these very intimate images of ourselves with our love interests because we can. And then these things get shared. And there is a Netflix documentary of 4 teens right now who had some very intimate images of themselves shared. And 2 of those 4 teens died by suicide. And so it's just an incredibly easy time to share really embarrassing things about one another. And it really creates risk for people to feel really trapped, like they have no way of getting away from this situation. The other area that we see a lot of shaming is with our LGBTQIA2 plus population. We live in a very conservative community. El Paso County is the most conservative community in Colorado. Even though we are in a blue state, you are in a red city, people. And so we have a lot of youth who are really scared to be themselves in their own homes. We have a lot of people in this community who feel like they don't belong and, who are trying to deal with the different pieces of that as they try and learn how to exist in this conservative community. And so there is a lot of public shaming. And you look at what's going on with our school boards right now, and the fact that the past few years we've been telling our young people, like, be who you are, because we were really making some headway at our schools. And a lot of those policies and the work that's been done are being overturned. And so these kids who we told, you are safe to be yourself in public, are now unfortunately not safe. And there's not a lot that we can do about it because we accidentally gave up control to some of that stuff. And so it's really paying attention and understanding what that means, what it means to publicly shame someone or to make someone feel less than. And just understanding that these are significant triggers for thoughts of suicide. And then fear of becoming a burden to others. We have a lot of elderly in our community who die by suicide because of this reason, because they don't want their families to have to take care of them, or because they feel like they don't have a lot of people and they don't just want to be a burden to the community or to society, because we're not a culture that really honors our elderly. And so that's another area of risk that we have to pay attention to, especially if we're working in human services, because we are likely to come across some of these folks. So now that we've reviewed some of the most common factors and warning signs that are often drivers of thoughts of suicide, how do you ask that question, right? It's so uncomfortable. And why? Why, Cass? Why do you want me to ask that question? And so let's talk about it. First off, don't wait. If that alarm bell is going off in your head, even if you can't make it make sense to yourself, have a conversation, get more information. Don't just wait. Because I have been to a lot of funerals where people have said, they say 2 things. They say, we had no idea, or they said, I meant to talk to them. I knew something was going on. And, I just hadn't had the time. And I kept telling myself, like, I need to talk to this person. And so don't wait. You taking that time could make all the difference. Be persistent. Remember that we come from a culture that doesn't talk about this very easily. There's not a lot of safe spaces for talking about hard things. And so if they're reluctant, just be persistent. List off some of those warning signs that triggered you to even have the conversation. I noticed this, this, and this. I noticed that you seem this. I've observed this, and I'm just wondering what's going on. Remove the audience. Do not do this in public. Create some emotional safety. Allow them to talk freely. Here's what we do. We accidentally kill with compassion. Just like earlier when I said people do say it directly, they say things like, I just want to die. I don't want to be here anymore. And we respond with like, it is not that serious, or quit talking crazy, right? Same thing when someone says, look, I know nobody wants me here. I know that everything that I touch breaks. I am no good. There's no reason for me to be here anymore. This is what we do. We say, no, I want you to be here. I know I can list 10 people right now who love you, who want you to be here. I know you are good at so many things. Let me tell you what you're good at. And so because we are trying to provide reassurance, because that feels very caring, however, that puts up a roadblock to honest communication. So instead, tap into the feelings of what they are saying. It must really hurt to feel like everything that you touch breaks. That must be really hard. It must be really lonely to feel like no one wants you around. That kind of rejection is really hurtful. And just validating, showing some empathy and compassion, and really sending this message of like, your feelings based on what you're telling me make sense. Give yourself plenty of time. You wouldn't tell someone with appendicitis, like, hey man, I think you have appendicitis, but like I have 5 minutes. So whatever I can do in this 5 minutes, and then you're on your own, right? We wouldn't do that because we know that it's possibly a life or death situation, and life or death situations can change our schedule sometimes. Have your resources ready. Know what you are going to offer up. So if you don't already, make sure you have that Colorado crisis line in your phone. Make sure you know what the text line is. Make sure you know where those walk-in assessments are. Make sure you know what resources are available at your employer's office or your school's office so that you can have some resources ready to talk them through. And then no matter what, just ask. I have this conversation a few times a day. I work at PEC Suicide Prevention Partnership. So I'm really comfortable having the question, and I have a lot of different built up vocabulary to do it. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it sounds really pretty or if you think you have all the right words, just ask. Because we know simply asking the question can help us to identify this is someone who needs help. Asking the question. So yes, you can take a more kind of less direct approach and ease your way into it, starting with things like, have you been very unhappy lately? Are you thinking about doing something unsafe? Are you thinking about hurting yourself? But here's the thing. If someone's like, I'm going to be honest with you, I am not going to lie. And you say, are you thinking about doing something unsafe? And they are very trained in that firearm safety, and they know 100% that they're going to be able to do this without harming anyone else. Then they might feel like they aren't thinking about doing something unsafe. When you say, are you thinking about hurting yourself? A lot of times the thought process is, I'm thinking of how I can give myself peace. So that's why you want to use more direct, clear language. Do you ever wish you could go to sleep and never wake up? That's not really asking what you're wanting to ask. And so a lot of times when you take that less direct approach, you're going to have quite a conversation to get the information that you need anyways. If you want to take a more direct approach, you can say things like, hey, it is really common when someone has been fired from their job and they feel rejected by their family and they're feeling backed into a corner. It's really common for someone in this situation to be having thoughts of suicide. And I'm wondering if that's what's going on for you. Or saying like, you sound really like you're in a bad place right now, and I'm worried that you're having thoughts of suicide. Is that what's going on? And then you could just simply say, are you thinking of killing yourself? And just ask the direct question so you can get a direct answer. No matter how you ask it, just do your very best to ask it without judgment or without threats of consequence. Saying it like, "You're not suicidal, are you?" Everything about my face just now, my tone, that all has an overtone of judgment. Or a lot of times our parents will make mistakes by saying things like, "Do we need to go back to the hospital? Is that what's going on right now? Is that where we're at?" And that just, that kind of sends some threats of the consequences of being honest with me. And so you don't want to put up those roadblocks. Any decisions that are made about the resources that are accessed, that conversation needs to happen when they really feel like you care about them, like you have heard their story, and based on the story that they've told, you have some recommendations of help. But if you just go straight into that professional mode of, okay, you said suicide, here's the list of things that I know I'm supposed to ask, and I'm going to ask them just like I'm reading off of a paper. That doesn't feel good, and it's very triggering for individuals who have been in this seat before and have had a bad experience. And so you need to make it a conversation that feels like you authentically and genuinely care about them and their well-being, that you have taken the time to really understand and hear what is going on with them. Once you have an understanding that, yes, this person is possibly at risk for suicide, they have said they are thinking about it, then you need to persuade them to live. Not forever, until you get them to help, right? Until you can get some more help. So the first way to get someone bought into you as someone who cares about them is to genuinely listen. And so if you are listening, you should be doing very little talking. If you're in this conversation and you find that you are doing the most talking, you're wrong. You need to encourage and elicit them to communicate with you. And so if you have never taken an active listening training, motivational interviewing, or anything like that, I would say Google it. Google active listening tools and then practice them. Go on an active listening happy hour with your coworkers where you're just only using active listening techniques, or do it to someone you love without them knowing that that's what you're practicing. And they're going to say, "You are being so weird." And that is because it is not the natural way that we listen. That is not how we are really kind of naturally built. And that's why you have to be intentional about it. And sometimes you have to learn how to do it first. Once they say, "Yeah, I am thinking about that," don't focus on the suicide, which is what we tend to do as professionals. That's where we kind of stop the storytelling and we start getting the information that we need to understand what we need to do next. Look, as long as you are having a conversation with this person, they're alive, they're safe. So take the time to get all of the information that you truly need to understand what their kind of bigger needs for help are, right? So that cliched saying of suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem, right? So that's why you have to know and have a good understanding of what is that temporary problem. What is it so that I can help you work through it, so I can give you some other options. If you just focus on, "Yep, you said that, you said you have a plan, you said this and this, and now I have to do this," you're no longer having a conversation. You're no longer partnering with them. Zero judgment. I don't care if he knew that girl for 2 days and you think like there are so many other fish in the sea, or she was just a hussy anyways. Why do you even care? Right? It's they feel rejected. He feels like his heart is broken and he'll never be okay again. I don't care if it's, "I wanted to wear a red shirt today and I had to wear a purple shirt." I don't care how you feel about their situation. What you need to care is how they feel about their situation, because understanding the level, well, one, the emotion that they're experiencing, and then the level of that emotion that they're experiencing, you will be in a better place to understand what kind of support they need and possibly be able to relate with them more, because you can say, "Okay, well, I never felt rejected after loving someone for 2 days, even though I knew that they were a huge slut anyways. But I do know what it feels like to be rejected. I do know what it feels like to lose someone, and I have an understanding of what my emotional needs were during that time. And that understanding those emotions can put you in a better place to relate. And then offer hope in any form, but do not lie. As you have these conversations, you're going to hear about situations, stories, and scenarios that you cannot fix. But what you can let them know is you are not alone. You do not have to figure this out on your own. You do not have to be embarrassed about what's happening because I care about you and I want to partner with you in this situation. Those are the things that you want to offer up, things that you can actually do. I think that I can help connect you with some helpful things that will help you work through this. Not, I am going to come in here and fix everything for you and make everything better, because in most cases, that will not be what we can do. That will not be the role that we will play. As I'm having this talk with them and I'm trying to get them to agree to engage in seeking out some resources, the language I want to use is really parallel language of, let's get help together. Will you let me help you do this? Can I help you have this conversation with your wife? Can I help you get to this place where you need to get? Can we go together to do this? And then to do that, you really need a commitment of safety. Can you promise that you can stay safe while we ride in the car to the assessment center? Can you sit safely without doing anything to hurt or kill yourself while we wait for someone to get here? But again, being clear with your language and what you're asking them to do, and understanding that this safety plan has to cover the time that they're with you until the time you transfer them to other care. And so with that most imminent risk situation, yes, I'm having thoughts of suicide. Yes, I have a realistic plan for suicide. And yes, I have a strong intention of accessing this plan. They need help right away. So it's like, can you sit here with me while I call someone to come to us? Can you ride with me safely while we go get you help? Those are kind of the two things. That is your safety plan. But for someone else who says, I don't know, I just feel like I'm at the end of my rope here. I don't have any other, I've tried everything I know how to do. And so, yeah, I am kind of thinking about that. I am thinking that maybe that's the only solution. And you say, and as you hear their story and as you're wrapping up and you feel like you've heard everything and now you're into that portion of safety planning, you might say something like, okay, so I know that you said that you're having thoughts of suicide, and I'm trying to understand, what we need to do to try and keep you alive today. So can you please tell me if you have a plan for how you would die by suicide, or do you have a suicide plan? And they might say something like, I don't know, like maybe I'll jump in front of a car, maybe I'll take a billion pills, maybe I'll do this or that. So this is someone who is definitely having thoughts of suicide, definitely at a higher level of risk, not necessarily imminent. And so here's what you know about this person. They must get help. It doesn't have to be right this second, but until they get help, they must have increased supervision and they must have reduced access to lethal means. And so those are the things that need to be addressed in your safety plan for the duration of time between this conversation and when they're accessing help. So if you get them an appointment somewhere on Monday and it's Friday, you have to safety plan through Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday up until their appointment. And that safety plan has to include increased supervision, reduced access to lethal means, and they need to have increased supportive connections during that time. And so that means you're going to have to involve other people, because this safety plan has to be able to go across all of the different environments that they're going to be in from Friday to Monday. Are they going to be at home? Are they going to go to sports practice? Are they going to go to church? Are they going to go to work? Because if so, someone from each of those environments needs to be clued into this plan, or the same person needs to be with them across all of those different environments, because we wouldn't leave someone who has a serious illness by themselves, right? And if you brought them to someone else and transferred their care to them, you would say, hey, I need you to know that this is going on for them, and here are the things that you need to do to care for them. That's the same situation. Someone who is having thoughts of suicide and you feel like is at risk of dying by suicide cannot be left alone. And then the last part of QPR is that refer part, which I just kind of talked about with our safety planning. So the best referral obviously involves taking that person directly to someone who can help. So come with me to go see or talk to this person. Let's call this person together. You can call the crisis line together, or the next best referral is a commitment for them to accept help and then making arrangements for them to get help. So that's today is Friday, you have an appointment on Monday kind of situation. And then the last third best referral that you can make is giving them the information to have with them, and then having a good faith commitment from them that they do not intend to die by suicide. So this is the person who says, man, Cass, I just feel a lot better after talking to you. I'm a lot more calm now. I think I was just freaking out before. I don't think I need any of that. I think I'm okay. And so I'm going to say, are you sure? I'd be happy to help you make these calls, or I'd be happy to go with you. And they're going to say, no, I think I'm good. But I mean, thank you for talking to me today. And so I'm going to say, okay, let's put this crisis line in your phone just in case something changes, just in case in the middle of the night you feel all alone, like you really need to talk to someone and you're feeling like you're back in this dark place and having thoughts of suicide again. Take a picture of this business card, or just know if you want me to call and make you an appointment, like you change your mind, just let me know. And they're like, no, I'm good. And like, okay, so you really feel like you're not having thoughts of suicide. You're not thinking about killing yourself. No, man, I mean, I know I was talking about that, but I feel a lot better now. Like, okay. So you do what you can, right? But first, just know that any willingness for them to accept any kind of help, to have this conversation with you at any level, usually results in creating an effective window of prevention. And so we know that most individuals who someone takes the time to do this with will not go on to die by suicide. And that's a huge window of prevention that we can all take action in. So don't be nervous to try it. Since almost all efforts to persuade someone to live instead of die by suicide will be met with agreement and relief, don't hesitate to get involved or to take the lead. So, someone who is not feeling really well, or they're really experiencing acute health symptoms, they sometimes just need a voice of reason and calm. So you're going to have the conversation, you're going to listen to their story, and then you might say something like, hey, I can tell you are in a really dark and unsafe place, and I really want you to be alive. So please come with me to go get checked out. Let's just see if someone can give you some extra help, more help than what I think I can give you. And they're almost always going to say, okay, or let's get you an appointment for Monday and let's figure out how to get you through this weekend. Let's see who can hang out, who can spend some time with you. And again, in most cases, they're going to say, okay, but regardless, they're going to know that you took the time because you saw them and you're willing to listen to them. And this is going to show them that you care about them, and that could make all the difference. Some additional tips, just using language like, I want you to live, I'm on your side, we'll get through this together, I'm going to sit with you while you are in this. Those can make a lot of difference, and that's because you're just trying to create a sense that you are partnering with them and helping them to understand that they are not alone. Get others involved. Another trainer that I took a training from, she said, build a bridge, don't try to be a life raft. And that's because it's exhausting. And plus, we talked about them needing to be safe across environments. So that means you're going to have to involve other people in their plan. And then make sure you have some follow-up that makes sense with what's within your role. But you've basically just asked this person to get emotionally naked with you. And so don't just like, wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. But, what can I do? Can I check in with you again in a couple of days, or after your appointment, or tomorrow? Can I text you? I have a ton of reminders in my phone to text different people just to let them know that I'm here for them, that I'm thinking about them. Those small steps of showing care, and that can make a huge difference. If you've never heard the story of the gentleman named Kevin who jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge but lived, it's his story that always really resonates with me, because he talks about a few things. One, he talks about the minute that his feet left the railing, he knew that he did not want to die. And so that encourages me about the importance of prevention. The other thing he talked about was this deal that he made with himself, which is so common. If someone stops and asks me if I'm okay on my way to the bridge, I know that I shouldn't do it. But if no one stops, then I know that I should. I'm totally paraphrasing, not his words. And he remembers the 3 people who he made eye contact with on his way to that bridge that said nothing to him, that for him reinforced this idea that he didn't matter. And so I think about that. Here's a young man who, as he's telling his story, lets us know that he has been diagnosed with bipolar and schizophrenia. So I think about how he must have presented. He's on public transportation. He is probably sweaty, probably like talking under his breath, but just probably looking, a little like someone who I might be nervous to talk to. And so I just think about how we handle that usually. Usually we turn away or we give that person space. We don't think about getting curious before consequence. We don't think about saying, hey, you look like you might need some help. Is there something I can do to help you right now? Is there someone I can call? Right? So just taking a minute to show you care, it could make all of the difference. Any questions or comments? Any feedback? Now would be the time to unmute yourselves, turn on your cameras, put something in the chat. Here's that awkward moment where no one says anything. I'm going to show you guys some resources. So obviously the Colorado Crisis Line and the text to talk line. If you don't have those in your phone as a contact, you should. And then the other thing is when you're doing QPR with someone and they're like, I would never call the crisis line and talk to a stranger, right? So you can say, well, let's do it right now and see what it's like. The crisis line is prepared to take practice calls from you. Make sure you know where the 24-hour walk-in assessment centers are, which are Diversus Health, the Lighthouse, Cedar Springs, and Peakview. They all take walk-in assessments 24 hours that are free. So they will do those assessments regardless of your insurance situation. And if you are truly at risk of dying by suicide, they cannot turn you away. If someone doesn't know where the assessment centers are or they don't feel like they can safely get there, they can go to any emergency room for assessment as well. Most hospitals are getting better at that, but I would recommend if they could get to a behavioral health center, that's probably the best option. If they call 911, El Paso County Sheriff has the Beacon team, which is a licensed mental health professional and a trained first responder. Colorado Springs Police Department has the CRT, which is the Community Response Team. And now they also have the ART, which is the Alternative Response Team. Both of those teams have a mental health professional. They're both designed to respond to mental health emergencies. So when they call 911, they need to identify it as a mental health emergency and see if any of these teams can respond. At Pikes Peak Suicide Prevention Partnership, we do offer free counseling. So free individual counseling, free suicide loss bereavement counseling. We have weekly groups that happen. We have adult peer support groups, an adult grief group for individuals who have lost someone to suicide. We have those same things for teens and youth, broken up by age, starting at age 6 and up. We have a middle school DBT skills group. We have an art group that is, designed to help you use art as a coping tool, and we give away a ton of cool art supplies at that. We have a peer support program for adults and youth where they can be paired with a peer support person who they can have scheduled contacts with via phone, text, virtual. They can meet for coffee. They can meet at our center, lots of different things. But a lot of folks who are struggling with thoughts of suicide don't have a lot of social connections. And so it's just a way to help fill that gap. We also have a teen mentor program because many of our teens do not have a trusted adult, which we know is the strongest protective factor against suicide for our youth. Inside Out Youth Services, serving our LGBTQ plus youth. providing them some safe spaces to interact with one another, both virtual and in person. And then they have some great parent support groups. So many of our parents in this community are really trying to navigate like, whoa, my kid told me this thing and I have no idea how to deal with it. And so they have a trans parenting group, which helps parents kind of work through this conversation and this change in their household. NAMI of Colorado Springs, they have weekly in-person groups. They also have free classes for building coping skills. And they have one set of classes, they're free 6-week classes for an individual who is struggling with mental health. And then they have another set of classes, again, 6 weeks, and they are free for family members or friends who are supporting someone else who is having mental health challenges. Everyone always asks me for like a comprehensive resource list. The best resource list we have in this community is on the Pikes Peak Library District website for mental health resources. If you search tough topics on their website, it'll bring you to a mental health resource list that a Pikes Peak Suicide Prevention volunteer checks every month to make sure that those resources stay up to date. If it's not a mental health resource that they're needing, there's the Helping Hands resource list, also on the Pikes Peak Library District website. But both of those lists are checked often to make sure they're up to date, which I think is incredibly important because I left one of our emergency rooms after taking someone there for a mental health emergency. And I was given a resource list that was noted to be last updated in 2015. So important that we have up-to-date resources that we are sharing with folks. And then some other resources that I just like to share. If you don't know what the Second Wind Fund is, it's a nonprofit that provides funding for youth mental health treatments. This can be supplemental, like if they are underinsured, or for someone who has no insurance, but it can be for any type of mental health treatments. And then also there's a ton of appointments not being used for the I Matter campaign that just came out. So that's another resource for free mental health for youth. NowMattersNow.org is a great resource for just seeing videos and different articles on different mental health topics. I think it's really helpful for family members and parents who are just trying to wrap their head around like, what is this whole mental health thing? Additional suicide prevention trainings can be found at sbrc.org. So it's a Suicide Prevention Coalition. And they also have the CALM counseling, which is for practitioners who are having the reduced access to lethal means talk with their clients or their clients' families. There's a zero suicide training if you just Google zero suicide. And then, of course, I'm sure you guys have all heard of it, the letstalkgrit.com free training, which has to deal with building resiliency, which is like the buzz term during the pandemic. So yes, I will be sending these slides or a PDF of them so that you guys can have them. And then, if you ever need information about Pikes Peak suicide prevention, we have a form on our website that you can easily just submit and someone will call you or contact you via email, whichever one you determine. Pretty quickly, like within the day or next day, depending on what you identify as your need on your form. Or if you just have a situation where you're just unsure of what resources are needed, we have our community resource desk that someone is at every day. You can direct someone to come there on Mondays. There's a person from Diversus Health sitting at that desk because so many times we try to refer people to Diversus Health and they get pissed off at that automated phone system. And so Diversus Health, a human being, comes and sits in our office every Monday from 10 to 4. And so you can direct people to walk in to talk to that person to access resources through Diversus Health. And so those are some of the things that we try to do just to help people connect to services. So if there are no other questions, which I had 0 of them, except for will you get these slides, then you guys are free to log off. I will hang out until everybody has logged off, just in case somebody has something that they needed to chat about one-on-one. If there's more than one of you, I'll use breakout rooms. Other than that, I'm very glad that all of you sat through this training. Please recommend it to others so that we can increase our informed public and have a good rest of your day and week.
Hi.
Hi there.
I did have a super quick question before I got